Okay, wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Holistic Wisdom live series, Collective Conscious Awakening. And today's guest, oh, there's a little bit of an echo. I can hear myself. I don't know if it's coming from my phone. Today's guest is an amazingly talented, beautiful human being. Her name is Brana Mijatovic. Brana is a Ph.D. in ethnic musicology and studies world and music cultures. She's also a healer, an astrologer, and helps people around the world who are suffering from anxiety, stress, and any kind of traumatic disorders to create deeper and lasting positive transformations in their life. And today we're going to focus on astrology. I love astrology, so I cannot to dive into it. And at the end, we'll also talk about what you offer, because you're also offering classes online. So people who are interested in learning from you can take the opportunity, especially being at home at the moment and having the laptops or the iPhones, they can easily access you. So I'm so excited. I want to talk to you about astrology. And one thing I wanted to say, which I did not know, that I just recently discovered, is Hippocrates, who is kind of the father of medicine, was studying astrology and using astrology in his practice.
Yes, yes.
And
well,
I find that fascinating. So please share how we can use astrology. Talk to us about the history of astrology and why, we're calling it the art and science, because it really is that. And it can help us navigate life.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I loved connecting with you when we first connected, which was quite recent. And I'm so happy to be here because I love talking about astrology. And there is so much to talk. So I have really tried to streamline it and to really be specific, exactly to address those issues that you just mentioned. So first of all, the astrology is about 4,000 years old. There are lots of historical documents that point to that 4,000 years ago period when there were first written accounts of astrological facts and aspects and so forth. And then it really got solidified in ancient Greece. And so the Hippocrates also is very important in that respect. And then there were many other scientists as well as healers who have contributed to the science of astrology. Few people know that Johannes Kepler, who is an astronomer, right? We know what Johannes Kepler is famous for and the 4 laws and everything. He actually also was an astrologer. And up until the end of the 17th century, astrology and astronomy were together, were considered to be one and the same thing, because astrology has developed for people to find meaning in daily life. And of course, then when they saw how much material there is, when people saw how much material there is, it goes beyond just the daily life. It can tell us a lot about ourselves, how to navigate our lives, personally, long-term and short-term. So this is what we're going to talk about today, of course. And then I also want to bring this to the 20th century and a little bit about what the actual science of it is, which a lot of people misunderstand. And that is a big thing that I would love to talk about, but that would take us about 2 hours if I were just to explain the misunderstandings about all of that by the scientists. So scientists love to bring astrology down, but every time I read something from a scientific point of view, it is always written by a scientist who has no idea what astrology actually is and has never studied astrology, has never looked into beyond what they think is astrology, which from their writings about it seems to be just what you read in the newspapers, daily, what is going to happen to you, Aquarius, today, right? But if we go to Carl Jung, and I hope that everybody who listens knows the importance of Carl Jung for the history of humanity pretty much. But if you don't, he was a psychologist who was super influential in the 20th century. We could call him a social influencer because he has influenced the various disciplines, not just people randomly across the world, but many different disciplines. what is interesting is that today, when we talk about shadow work, every time we mention the shadow work, that comes actually from Jung. Every time we mention synchronicity, that comes from Jung. And what is interesting is that he has actually used astrology. There are written letters to his contemporaries where he explains that he has found astrology tremendously helpful when he would come across a patient that he would not really know how to approach that problem, how to approach the problem that the patient was having. And then he would look into his or her astrology birth chart, and then he would find a solution. So it is exactly actually what I'm doing when people come to me for an astrology reading, because there are so many things you can see from a natal chart. And I call it the soul's blueprint, because it really is so. And if we actually look at that, and if we understand what is it that our soul needs, what is it that our inner child needs, what is it that our energy needs to feel rejuvenated, to feel replenished, to feel supported, then we can really go on and develop all of those things, as opposed to fishing in the dark and thinking maybe this is for me, and maybe I should go in that direction. So for me, it is fascinating. You know, I started studying it when I was 12 years old. Actually, I read my first astrology book when I was 12 years old, and there is a very traumatic experience actually associated to that, because I went to a library, and I mean, the library that I always would go to. And the way I like to choose books is I would just go through the library and go, you know, next to the shelves and just be drawn to something, you know. And so I was drawn to this book, and I opened it, and I read about my birth date, and I, you know, it was good, it was great, it was good, it was great. And all of a sudden it said, and you will very likely die when you turn 28. And I'm like, oh my God, I closed the book, put it on the shelf, ran out to the library. And then I was thinking, well, you know, I was 12, right? So I was thinking, well, there is plenty of time until 28, and I'm going to live my life. And then if it happens, it happens, right? And so I remember that. And when the 28th, you know, when I turned 28, I was thinking, okay, so this is the year. Let's see what happens. Like, you know, I wasn't scared. I'm usually not scared of things like that. And of course, nothing happened that was in any way traumatic or in any way threatened my life. But when I learned more about astrology, and as I was learning more, what I realized is that they were actually describing something called a Saturn return. So this was an old astrology book, and this is also where a lot of misconceptions about astrology come, because some astrological books that were written many, many years ago actually do carry those fatalistic connotations without explaining the width of the possibilities, right? So with the Saturn return, every person experiences Saturn return between the ages of 28 and 30. And this is considered to be a turning point for many reasons. And a lot of times we go through very serious and very life-changing lessons, kind of, you know, come across challenges so that we can overcome them. And so this is what that was. That's, you know, I understood why it was. But the thing is that even though I ran out of the library that day, it didn't actually stop me from learning about astrology. So I started studying and studying and studying, and you know, this is where I am so many years later. So why is astrology considered to be a science when it can give us something so weird like this? Well, for real astrologers, and when I say real, I mean people who seriously study this, who study this for many, many years, who study different approaches. I mean, consider if it has been around 4,000 years ago, there are many different approaches, right? And then there are some newer approaches that a lot of people have synthesized different things and put them together in different ways, but still keeping the basics of the astrology the same. As the world is changing, we also have to understand that we need to interpret things in a slightly different way, right? So all of these things play out in terms of when we think of astrology. But to go back to the scientific part, really something that can tell us, okay, there is really something there. And that is the connections between different planets. So the connections can be, I call them harmonious or disharmonious. Sometimes I say friendly or not so friendly. And what that simply means is that when planets form, planets move in the sky, right, at different rates. And so at certain times, they come across each other and make different connections. And when those connections are under mathematically exact and specific angles, that's when they have the most important influence on our lives. And this actually has been studied and documented. And for those of you, if there's somebody who asks me a question about that, I'm going to post a link where they can find detailed information about that. But it has been looked at what happens when those planets form those specific mathematically very precise angles, and when those angles are harmonious, and when those angles are not harmonious, right? So there are specific numbers there. So this is why we can say that astrology is scientific. But why is it an art? Well, because there is so much data. We have the planets that we deal with, we have the sun and the moon, which technically are also called planets when we do a chart. And then we have the relationship between them, and then we have where they play out in your life, which is astrological houses, and then which sign are there, which is an expression of that planet. So when we take all of this into consideration, we can see that there are so many possibilities, and we really need to study a lot to be able to meaningfully say something about those possibilities. And this is another thing where hardcore scientists is going to have trouble, because they're used to X meaning Z or whatever, whatever the formula is. But here you actually have to have life experience to be able to understand astrology or interpret astrology properly, and also to have had a lot of astrological experience, meaning looked at a lot of charts, read a lot about how other people have understood those charts, and then of course followed it through your own life so that you can see how it feels. So one of the things that I do on my Facebook page is I post almost every day for the last 5-6 years, I think. I've been posting almost every day about what is happening in the sky. And out of everything that is happening, I choose what I see as the most important and what will most likely impact the largest group of people. And then I write about that in about a paragraph or so. So that is also a skill. You have to know a lot in order to be able to combine it and to say something about that is going to help somebody, right? So I'm going to take a breath and let you say something because when I start talking about astrology, it's really hard.
So let's break it down for people that actually don't know anything about astrology or have maybe a little bit of information. So I know, like, for example, we can talk about general things and what they mean, right? So people have that understanding, like what does the sun mean, the moon, the rising sign, Venus, Mercury. So let's just briefly touch on that. And then I want to ask you a question. You talk about inner child, and where in the chart can a person find their inner child?
Okay, I'll talk about that. Okay.
And then Saturn return, how often does that happen in a person's life from an astrological perspective? And I know you said it's a big lesson. Does it mean it's also karmic? So let's kind of shape that so people have more understanding. Okay.
Yeah. So this big introduction was just about why is astrology both a science and an art. And now we're going to dive into how this can actually help you, right? So I'm going to start with something that everybody is hopefully going to relate to right away. And then I have a tip at the very end as to what you can do if you have never done anything in terms of astrology, but also if you're a very experienced astrologer. So if you stick to the end, you'll hear both of these things. All right, so the first thing that we want to think of is, so I mentioned that the art of astrology is about being able to say something meaningful, right? About what a person sees in somebody else's chart, so what an astrologer sees in a person's chart. So that comes from, so there is one particular planet that rules thinking, synthesizing information, being able to communicate that information. And that planet is Mercury. So here is an experiment that all of you who do know your chart can try to see if you can connect with this. But if you don't know your chart and you recognize yourself in one of these descriptions, then you can check and see if that is actually the case for you. So if somebody's Mercury is in water sign, so there are 3 options there for the water sign. And when I see that in a chart, I know that I can use poetic language, symbolic imagery in describing their chart, and that they will react very openly to that, that they will be very receptive to that, that they will really resonate with them. Because for Mercury in water, it is important that there is a bigger meaning that goes beyond the everyday life, beyond the practical life, when they think about things. And that is also how they would like to receive information, right? So Mercury in water signs. Now, if Mercury is in earth signs, that person would like to hear about practical things. How everything that I say actually connects to the practicalities of their life. They're not interested in imagination. They're not interested in building castles in the sky. They're not interested in envisioning things in the future. But what is it that from everything that they say, they can apply right now and they can actually see a result? So earth signs are all about practicality and being able to see the result. And that is also how they think. When they learn something, they want to be able to implement that right away. In contrast to air signs. So when an air sign receives an information, so when I say air signs in general, I mean Mercury in air signs. So when somebody says Mercury has Mercury in an air sign and they receive an information, they're really interested in just playing with the options, playing with the ideas, thinking about how it could be like that, and maybe it's like that, and maybe it's going to be like that. Or how can it contribute to humanity in general or at large? How can it change society? But they're not that interested in how can I apply that tomorrow to get more money, for instance, you know, to earn more money. And then we have fire signs. And for fire signs, it is super important that it sparks a fire in them, that it inspires them. It doesn't matter if it's realistic or not. It doesn't matter if they can apply it right away or not. Although for fire, right away is the key word also. But Mercury in fire signs really is very passionate and wants to sometimes even argue about ideas just because they feel it's important. Not so much to gain, you know, something, but really something that sparks their imagination, sparks their soul, but even more importantly, that brings that into life in some very, very dramatic way, in an inspiring way. So the Mercury in fire signs really wants to inspire more than anything else. So do you know where your Mercury is?
Yes, I already thought about all my kids too. So my Mercury is in the air sign and it's Aquarius. Totally on point, because for me it's always about big, huge concepts that have to do with humanity.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is totally on point. My partner is his Mercury is in Pisces. Deep thinker, which I am as well, but we take information in a different way.
So that is perfect. So you can then start thinking, if you do know, if you now have, let's say you have heard this for the first time, that this is how you can approach another person. And then if you know, obviously, you have to know a little bit about astrology to be able to apply that. Then you can think, okay, when I want to communicate something that is important to me, the best way for them to hear me would be to use some of the things that they naturally resonate with, which is that, for instance, for your husband, there would be some symbolic language, something creative, something that is very emotional. So if you appeal to their emotions, then that would have a better, they would be much more open to understanding what you actually mean and what is your intention, right?
Let me ask you another question. So let's say you are a teacher and a speaker on stage, and you want to get your point across. Let's say you have this way of communicating, which is Mercury. Your Mercury is in Aquarius.
Yes.
And actually, I know somebody else who has Mercury in Aquarius because I looked him up. Tony Robbins has Mercury in Aquarius.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering, knowing what you know, so how will people receive the information if you are these giant concepts of humanity and
Well, the first thing is, and just like with this talk and with any online talk, this is what I'm going to say next is much harder, but it is the key concept: know your audience. So that's number one, know your audience, right? Once you know your audience, for instance, I don't know who's going to be listening to this. So this is kind of a wide net. And so I'm doing a lot of different things that will hopefully be helpful to a lot of different people, right? That's my intention.
Yes.
But know your audience is number one. but then the second thing is, even though your natural style is Mercury in Aquarius, you may want to think, okay, I also want to apply to everybody. I'm going to assume all of them are in this room, right? So you're going to incorporate how could what you're saying be useful? And that would appeal to Mercury in the earth signs. How could what you say it can be applied to artists, let's say, and that will be, you know, so do something in an artistic way, use some imagery that would be very, maybe even use the water element imagery, right? Just using the words and the stories that have to do with water. And then that would resonate with the water element and so forth, right? So you see how that can be done in a way to really have people understand what you're trying to communicate. I don't do that as often as I should, I guess, in some ways, because I also am more interested in having people who really resonate with what I am and who I am as a person, and not so much with reaching everybody, although that should be my goal. You know, I know, because I am very passionate about what I do, but at the same time, you know, it is important to recognize these differences, and I'm okay with appealing to people who really can resonate with me and not really be popular for everybody, right?
Yes, so. Yes. Okay, this is perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Now, if somebody wants to really start doing something practical beyond this, what we've just talked about, and to track how the some astrological aspects can help them in their life, they can do one of the two things. One, they can check my Facebook and see what I post and see how much that resonates with them. That is free. You don't have to be my friend. You just check that and see. But for yourself, what you can do is track the positions of the moon. The moon influences us in the most basic level. It is the level that all of us feel, and it changes signs every 2 days, 2.5 days. And so it is very easy to track because the moon provides the background of the moods for the day, kind of the basic atmosphere. And even if you know nothing about astrology, let's say you don't know your chart, this is the first time you're hearing anything about astrology, you can track the positions of the moon by going to any of the sites that have that. One of them is LunaF, LUNAF.com. It doesn't have any charts, it doesn't have anything like that. It just tells you moon is at 20 degrees of Cancer today, right? Or something like that. And then you see, okay, so moon is in Cancer. Let's say you don't know where your moon is. And during the day, you just note how you naturally feel without being provoked, without, you know, going through a day with some upsets that are existing, but just notice if there's nothing really happening, how does it feel to you? And so the key word for the moon is how we feel something, right? So how does it feel? And then keep a journal and then follow what happens when the moon changes sign. So let's say it goes from Cancer into Leo. And so what, if any, changes are you feeling when it goes from Cancer into Leo? And so you do that for 28 days. By the 28 days, the moon has gone through the whole cycle and it's going to start again. And that's going to be your actual testing ground. So when it starts again, then you look at your journal and just check again. Okay, so moon is in Cancer today, just like a month ago, when this and this happened. And so you look into your journal and say, okay, so I had this, this, and this happen. This is how I felt. And then a month later, you see if there is still something along those lines. And so this is how you can learn and apply astrology, even if you don't know anything about your astrological chart. Now, for people who do know their astrological chart, they can go at an even greater level of meaning. They can go even more deeply. So let's say you know that your moon is in Cancer. So I'm just choosing it because today moon is in Cancer. Yeah. And so it's your moon, right? Is that what you said? Okay, perfect. So when the moon is in Cancer, there are certain types of things that, and once again, I did post that on my site, but on my Facebook page, but we can certainly mention what it actually is. So very briefly, when the moon is in Cancer, we feel good. Those people who are, let me see how how specific do I want to be. Those people who do have moon in Cancer are going to feel this the most. Then people who have moon in any of the other water signs, so in Pisces or Scorpio, are going to feel that as well. And then some other signs are going to feel that based on different other things, right? But you always want to think, okay, is my moon here? And if it's not here, if it is in the same in the same element, right, which is water. So let's just stop at that. And so if your moon is in Cancer and the moon is transiting and it comes to Cancer, then what you want to think, or what you're going to very likely feel is very emotional. You would want to be at home. You would want to be just surrounded by things and people and situations that you're familiar with. You want to be kind of withdrawn and maybe just be by yourself, maybe not even talk to someone, maybe just write in your journal. You want to look through your old photographs to remember some happy times. You want to connect with your family. You want to nurture yourself through really good cooked food, home cooked, either you or your partner cooking for you. And so those are just basic general themes for how we might feel when moon is in Cancer. And then, as I said, for those people who do have moon in Cancer, then it would depend on what is the situation in their natal chart, because that moon can connect harmoniously or disharmoniously with some other planets. And so that would very much depend on how these energies play out, even when somebody has that in their chart. And then on top of that, in an actual transit, we could have moon being in a disharmonious connection with a different planet. So for instance, moon is in a disharmonious connection with Pluto today. So for a lot of people who do have some childhood stuff and inner child healing still to do, this might be a somewhat challenging time, specifically today. Tomorrow it's already going to be different, but obviously if something comes up today and is not resolved, it can carry into tomorrow, right? So there are many things and many different layers that we can look at when we look at somebody's chart, right? So I'm going to stop here and see if you have some questions.
So you did mention that the inner child, the person can find in their chart, and it's under the planet of Pluto.
No. Good that you asked, because I don't want to talk about that.
So that will. So I just wanted to. You'll go back to the inner child. I do have a question, and it might be a complicated question for somebody who knows nothing about this. So, like, for example, for somebody who is born under the void of course moon, what does that mean? So even though I have my moon in Cancer, but let's say I guess it's the word is moon Lilith. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well,
and how are they related?
This is my answer. You can't really look at just the void of course moon and say this means that, because it depends what else your moon is connected to in the chart. And of course there are some other things in your chart that we have to look at, because void of moon situation, void of moon time period, I'm not going to explain the technical stuff. You can find the technical stuff online, but that means that there is some sort of like calm seas. This is how I see it when I connect with my intuition to see what something is. So calm seas, things are not necessarily moving, right? So on one level you might think, okay, this is where, in order to connect with my emotions, I really need to achieve that calm seas, nothing moving. So that would be my best explanation without looking at the person's chart, because as I said, there are so many things that we still have to talk about in order to say that is what it means for you, right?
Right. Another question that I have is related to, let's say you have two people living together,
okay,
and their moons are in completely different places. Like, for example, somebody's moon can be in Cancer and another moon could be in Aquarius.
Yes.
And I find this, for me, I work with people, and out of curiosity, I don't do astrology, but out of curiosity, I started asking people, because I was very curious, like, why there's so much tension at home for people. And I want to see if that is like one of the big things for somebody who is emotional, who needs to feel living with somebody who's checked out, could be very challenging, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely, especially because moon connects to how we are at home, how we feel at home, are we comfortable at home. So once again, a person needs to look at the full chart in order to get all the information. But even if we look at just the moon, you want to once again think of how well do these moons, and you can think of them as people, how can they understand each other, and do they have this ability to understand each other? Of course, with astrology, the whole point of astrology is raising our consciousness so that we can understand each other no matter where our moon is, right? But but we do have to understand moon is our instinctive responses. So it is when we are tired, when we are sad, when we are already in a state that is not our, let's call it a perfect state where we are happy and full of energy. So when we are in any way a little bit less than our optimal state, that's when the moon energy comes out the most strongly, because it is that instinctive response, our first response. And this is why knowing where your moon is that much more important, so that you can get familiar with it, so that you can nourish it in a certain way, so that you can connect with people based on how you yourself experience life, and then understand how people experience life differently. So to answer your question more precisely, when somebody's moon is in Cancer, the other person's moon is in Aquarius, and if there is a misunderstanding, the more they understand about the other person's moon, the more they will be able to get what this other person needs. So I would say, I mean, there's so many online resources. Everything is for free. You know, everything is free today in terms of just the basic, understanding of astrology. A person can just go online and say, okay, so my partner has moon in Aquarius. Let me check what that is. What does it mean when somebody has moon in Aquarius? What do they need, right? And then see if you can provide that to them, and also if they are open to doing the same for you. That would be the ideal situation, right? And this is why I do astrology for couples as well, so soul astrology contracts, so that we can talk about these things. And so those couples who are interested in each other's growth and supporting their relationship, they can actually do that from a much, much more conscious perspective.
I love that. I think it's so important.
Yeah. So is there any way to see, I have some of my astrology students and some other of my friends following who said they will be live. So is there any way to see if there are any questions from them?
Yes, I will tell you. Somebody just said, hi, Brana.
Hi, whoever it is, hi.
Yes, hi. Okay, so let's dive into career choices, because I think that's also for practical reasons.
Yes.
Sometimes I would say people reject their true nature
and
follow a path based on what other people expect them to be.
Yeah.
And how to embody that, and also use the astrology to help an individual embody what they're actually here to expand on as their true nature.
Yeah, so that cannot be really answered just through the live, because there is no just one aspect that we look at when we look at that. There are at least 3 different things, and in somebody else's chart there are some complications, and we have to take the side roads and get to whatever. But it is an answer that the astrology can provide. And I have actually seen people who change course midlife because they realize, okay, after having an astrology reading, actually understanding, okay, this was something I did because I was guided to by my parents or the society, but this is something I really want to do, and then go and get an interview for that job and actually get the job. I mean, I've had clients like that. And so what is also important to know is that sometimes there are different energies that you can embody when you are looking for a job. So what that means is that somebody has a polarity of different energies, and they're wondering, well, sometimes I'm more quiet and sometimes I'm more extroverted, which would be better for that ideal job that I'm looking. And an astrological chart can tell us about that. So it is not about what job is good for you, which is also certainly easy to look into and to find, but also how do I need to be? What are some qualities that I can lead with, the qualities that the person already has? Nothing new to add, nothing new to develop, but already has, just to bring that out a little bit more when they're looking for that particular job. So that's why I love astrology.
So let me ask you another question, because I know I'm trying to get to where I'm guiding you to. So for example, I just recently discovered there's a line that's called midheaven, and this is why I was asking you about perhaps the meaning, the purpose, the embodiment of what we're meant to do here. Would you
Yes.
touch upon the midheaven line, because and does it correlate to your mission? Okay,
Yeah, yeah. It is very important, but not always in the way it is described. A lot of times with the lines, I have found that there is the least understanding and the least information about them. And so it depends. So there are lots of other things that can tell us about somebody's profession. And so I don't want somebody to look at, after a call, to look at me, have a line and just say, oh, wow, this says this and I'm not this. And how do I get, so it's a little more than just that. But yes, midheaven is very important. I will just tell you one thing that, and it is important, especially if the planet is right there. But how is that planet going to work is impossible to talk about now, because it is a whole astrological course, class, just like an hour on just that, in order to understand how the planet connected to that line actually is going to work and is going to play out in your life. Once again, we do have to look at the whole chart, because it can be colored by a lot of other things, right? So the most important thing is that, yes, we're going to talk about some specific things, but please understand that you're just getting a little bit, and this is not like a full picture. But that line, the MC, if you just want it for short, is about who we are when we are at our best, and what, just like with everything, depending on what is connected to it, it can be challenged or it can be supported, right? So that's the first thing, an important thing to know. So if it is challenged, it just means that we will get there, but we will get there slower. If it is supported, then it will be so obvious that for most people, they don't even want to talk about it. I see their MC line in their chart very strong and supported. And when they come to the reading with me, they say, I'm not interested in my profession. I'm very happy with my profession, right? So that's how it plays out. But for people who do need to struggle a little bit to get there, the important thing is to understand, okay, in which sign is it? So the first thing is the sign always. So depending on the qualities of that sign, they can get information about what are some of their strengths if they lead with that. So what are some of their strengths if they lead with that? But also, what are some of their self-sabotaging things that they may not understand if they don't look into the qualities of that sign? So every sign has a plus and a minus, right? Every planet has a plus and a minus, at least 5 in my, view. So it is important to look at that, because let's say, do you want to give me an example of MC in a particular sign?
We can use mine. Mine is Pisces.
Pisces, okay. So for Pisces, for MC in Pisces, obviously a career where there is a lot of, well, it has to be a spiritual career. So this is super, super important, and it needs to be as broad as possible. So not just, okay, spiritual, but then you need to do this. But for Pisces, it is important to explore all the creative aspects that they can possibly find within themselves. So that would be the plus. The minus would be that Pisces would often take on the pain of other people. So this is one thing that in a professional career, a person who does something like that, if they already don't have strong boundaries, and I mean energetic boundaries, they do need to develop that. They do need to work on that, because it's very easy for Pisces people to attract people who need a lot of help, and then for that help to just kind of be attracted to the Pisces empathic energy. And so that empathic energy, if it's not cleared regularly, can cause a lot of issues. Yeah. Right?
Yes.
So that would be very briefly of, if we are dealing with MC in Pisces.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Perhaps you can touch upon North Node and what does that mean? Mm-hmm.
Okay, so North Node, once again, lots of things that we can talk about, but one just very brief explanation would be, it could be called the point of destiny. So this is the place that shows us what is a lifelong task, what is it that we need to develop in this life, and also depending on what else is around, how it connects with other things, what are some of the obstacles on that path. So I've seen a lot of different combinations of North Node with different planets, and it also depends what is on the opposite side, right? So there are one easy thing to tell you about that, it will be easy to understand, would be that it is something that is not easy for us to do. So it is our task, but it doesn't come easily. And this is something that we can get discouraged about. This is something that we really need to keep at the forefront of our mind if we want to succeed in that. But at the same time, it is a soul's task to achieve that in this life. So it is not something that I would recommend just putting aside and saying, oh, well, if it happens, it happens, right? But it is something that if we are here, if we understand, if we stand behind this belief that we are here for a purpose, and that purpose is soul's growth, and of course, through that, helping as many people that we can. If we stand behind that, then North Node task is a very important task.
That's great. That's great. Okay, let's talk about the planet of love, Venus. And what does it mean?
Mm-hmm.
Different signs, I guess we could break it down.
Yeah, it stands typically for love, desire, what we value, and money, right? So these different things. But how it is expressed in a chart would depend on its condition, so to speak. And once again, what that means is where it is in a chart, how it connects with other planets, and of course which house it is in. So where it is in a chart in a zodiac sign, but also in which house it is in, because that would tell us if it is in somebody's, let's say, 7th house, their whole energy of that Venus is going to be focused on a personal partner. If it is in the 10th house, that energy is going to be focused on their career and on their work, and that's where they're going to pour all of their love energy, so to speak. So if you, for instance, go to an office of a person who has chosen a career that they love, first of all, that goes without saying. So those people cannot stay too long in a place. Well, first in a place that is disharmonious, that is not beautiful, and secondly, they very soon discover what they actually need to do in order to love their career. So you will not find too many people who have Venus in the 10th house doing something they don't like, because they just cannot. And then once you are, let's say they do something where it is in a particular space and they're their own boss, so they can decorate that space, it's absolutely beautiful. So it's beautiful. It's ordered. It's harmonious. The colors are gorgeous. They're usually flower. I mean, just beautiful. So this would be one way in which that Venus is expressing itself, that is not related to just love between people, but love as to what we pour our love into. Yeah.
Yes, that's great. Let's talk about the inner child, because I know you briefly touched on that. So I want to see how people can find their inner child in their chart and how they can work on it.
Mm-hmm. One way when we think about the inner child is, in every astrology chart is a combination of different influences. And once again, when I look at that, for me, just the same when I say about the archetypes, it's not just one thing. So when I look at it, it's usually a couple of different things that I then put together and get the sense of what their inner child is. Because it's not typically when an astrologer in general, who is not me, says inner child, a lot of times they mean the moon. But for me, I look at some other things and bring together that picture of what that inner child is, because we are very layered. It is not just one thing, but how many different things interact. And so that inner child can have several different characteristics. But if we want to really bring it down to something that people can look up themselves, then we can talk about it also as the moon, the energy of the moon. So that would be even more than helpful if people would know what their moon, or where their moon is, what the position of the moon is, and so then they could look some things up.
So I have another question based on that. So our Chiron, to me, somehow also represents that part of a child that is needing care
Yeah.
So how would you relate that to the inner child?
Mhm. Absolutely, it is a part. It is a wound that was typically coming from childhood, but then, we can think of it as coming from past lives as well. But typically from childhood, and this is something that as children we are so open, and we experience certain things that wound us very deeply, even though our parents may not have intended anything like that to happen. But it is a place where in general we are much more open to be wounded. And so if that is the only thing in that house, then we really need to look at what are some of the things that relate to that position. So for instance, if it is in the first house, it is such a deep pain that we are coming across it every single day, and we do have to deal with that. If it is in the second house, it can also be related to a personal sense of value, but it can be with how we attract money and how we are able to earn money, for instance, because our inner value does connect with how much we can attract and how much we are opening to receive, how much we are understand, right, what we are worth. So for some other placements, they can be kind of in and out. So if somebody has a Chiron in the 8th house, they may not really be able to even see it until somebody points it out to them. They may have just a vague sense that there is something there that is missing, and then come across certain situations in life that bring that out from time to time. So this is why it's very individual. And once again, knowing how it interacts with everything else is going to help us really get to the core of what is it that we need to do. I lost you for a moment. I don't know.
You're back.
Are you back? Okay. So what is it that we need to do in order to address that? But it is something that needs to be treated with a lot of care, and energy work for me has been without question the best way to deal with that, because a lot of these wounds are pre-verbal. They are there before we have learned how to integrate it on a conscious level, how to think about that. So this is why talking about it usually does not help for that.
I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
I love, of course, the concept of astrology is so complex, and I know that I'm trying to guide you into all these directions, but it's impossible to answer that. Just like with any kind of modality, you can't say, for me, I usually work with people who are chronically ill, so I can't say, well, if you have this, then that's the pill that you need. There is no. It's the same thing for astrology, and I think what we're trying to bring out to people today is really how complex it is.
Mm-hmm.
Those people that are interested in investigating the depth of who they are.
Yeah.
This is a fascinating, I would say, place to start. And you would be, you're offering classes online teaching this.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Those are typical. Well, when I was doing them in person, they were 2-hour classes. For the online, I have actually made sure that they are digestible, so it's 1-hour class, and we go in a very detailed way as to how to work with all of these elements, because it is one thing to really pick out all of these things that we have, and it is a fantastic way to start. This is how you need to start, right? But then if you really want to make sure you understand all the aspects, how they all connect, how you can help yourself through that, then I would definitely recommend astrology classes. But even before that, I would recommend an astrology reading, because that's where you're going to get an understanding of yourself. With astrology classes, you will also get it, but it's going to develop over a long period of time. But if you get it and then get astrology classes, you can go into that from many, many different angles. Because even though I do astrology and have been doing it for so many years, I still like from time to time to get a reading from an astrologer. Because every time a different person and a different person is going to tell you different things. Based on, we just talked about Mercury, right? Where their Mercury is, what they're going to see in their chart, they're going to accentuate. And the other thing is, at different points in our lives, we are open to hearing different things. So this is why it's not just, I had an astrology reading 20 years ago and I'm done, right? Because a lot of things have changed. You're much more maybe open and working on yourself. So astrology really helps you see what are some of the things that you can do. And then if you cannot do those things, then what are some energy work, healing practices that can help you with your particular problem? So not in general, this would be just for you.
Yes. And as always, this kind of work is customized, individualized, and this is what I always talk about. It's important to, if you're interested in expanding, awakening yourself, and growing, this is one of the tools that you can use in your life.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to just leave our audience with this last bit of advice. I want to go back to something we've talked about before, and that is once again the moon. So if you remember to just go and check your moon, you're going to be able to discover so much about yourself, and you will be able to nourish yourself, especially now when we all need nourishment more than ever. And you will understand, if you do feel a certain way one day, that it is going to go away. The hardest thing, I think, sometimes in life is that we think that when we get into a certain state, that's just how it's going to be forever, because that is just what the reality of the now is, right? But when you know, okay, so it's the moon in Cancer, and if it's the moon in Cancer, I know in 2 days it's going to go to Leo, and I know things are going to shift. So I just have to do X, Y, and Z that is going to help me until that shift happens, right? So that's why it's super, super useful to just be able to check that, even if you know nothing about astrology.
I love this. It's really about connecting to deeper layers of who we are.
Yeah.
And expanding and connecting to the consciousness in a bigger way.
Yes, yes. And not feeling guilty. A lot of people feel guilty when they give to themselves and when they think, well, I should really be doing this or I should really be doing that. And then when I have a lot of clients cry in my astrology sessions because they finally understand that somebody understands them, their deepest wounds as well as their deepest desires are recognized and validated by what I can see there, you know? And so just that, for many people is process. For me, it is such a sacred thing to be able to see that, but also to have that relationship with people who come for a reading. You know, it's a sacred relationship that somebody opens up their soul to you like that. And then it is for me the task to tell them all the things I can possibly tell them, so that they can either remove the obstacles they have, whether psychological or physical, or focus on those gifts. And so then the obstacles are going to fade away.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And how can people find you?
They can go to my Facebook if they just want to contact me through Messenger, and that's just my name, Brana Mijatovic, and that is also my website. So either way, you can contact me through Facebook or use my name to find my website, and then we can go from there.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your gifts, your passion. I love it.
You're so welcome. It was my pleasure. Bye.